we'll have a great discussion today. If you're not new to us or haven't had a chance to come to one of our events before, my name is Brian Toney. I'm an organizer with the Dallas Housing Coalition. We have over 170 organizations who are part of us, but we are not affiliated with the city. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we want to make sure that people aren't spending more than 30% of their income on housing, which we call housing burden. And unfortunately, Dallas is becoming unaffordable. So this is the main part of our message, is that the median income in Dallas is $58,200, and the average home price now is $405,000. So it's not, to afford that kind of home, you need to earn $135,000 as a household. And our housing has outpaced the growth in incomes as a city and for our residents. We want to make sure when we're talking about affordable housing, we're usually referring to that 30% to 80% of the cities of Dallas's average median income. You'll probably hear AMI or average median income thrown around from time to time. For a family of four, that's around $77,000. So your 30 to 80%, is going to be a range between 30,000, maybe on up to 65,000. But those are many of our people who drive our economy as a city. There are people who are working two jobs. There are people who are single parent households who only have one source of income. Many of our service industries, logistics, a lot of our top four occupations as a regional economy are really falling into that middle income spectrum. There's a great article in the New York Times, this week about people living out of their cars, earning $72,000 a year. And that's the kind of upward pressure that we're facing across the country. And we know that Dallas is no exception. And we, as a coalition, exist to help close this supply gap that you're seeing. Right now, we have a 36,660 unit supply gap that's expected to grow to over 80,000 units by 2033 if we do not do anything. That is a huge problem that's only going to continue to grow due to this rise in the gap between what people earn, which is in the pink there, and what median rents, and that's the top line, and what our median incomes are. So starting in 2020, you can see that gap kind of grow and put us in the position that we're in today, where Dallas is unaffordable. We also know that access to housing is the greatest reason why people move. Where people move, companies move. And that's not good for Dallas. We want Dallas to be the economic engine of our region. And we want to keep people, legacy residents who have been here for generations, and also continue to attract more people to the city of Dallas so that we have as strong of an economy as possible. We are calling for the city of Dallas to allocate $200 million in the upcoming 2024 capital bond program towards affordable housing. If you're not familiar with a bond, the city of Dallas and many municipalities go out for a bond every 5 to 7 years, depending, and they're for capital improvements, for infrastructure, big investments that they can't handle in their annual operating budgets. So they do have to be approved by voters. Right now, the capital bond program, and if it's put on the ballot, is expected in May of 2024. That could change, but we want to make sure that housing is a priority. And as you'll see in the next slide, from the last 4 bond programs in the city of Dallas, housing has received very little funding. In fact, $0 in 2012 and 2017. Some money was allocated towards homelessness, but most of what you'll see is that a large percentage has been dedicated to streets and transportation, other needs like parks, library and city facilities, cultural facilities, and economic development. So that is part of the reason why we are in the position that we are in, is that Dallas historically has not invested or prioritized housing in its previous bond programs. And we need to get caught up, not just closing that gap, but also planning for our future, because we know that Dallas needs 100,000 new and refurbished units by 2033 to keep up with our regional growth and companies that are relocating here. Again, this is that timeline with the May 2024 currently being planned. You might have attended one of the recent bond town halls that were taking place in city council districts across the city of Dallas. In December, early December, we're expecting a presentation from the city manager and the community bond task force chair to the city council, and they will have the ultimate say in the allocations across those different categories that you saw earlier. This has been a long process. There's already been a community bond task force that is making recommendations, and those representatives are people who are appointed by the mayor and city council. So we will share some more information with you about how you can reach out to them and let them know that housing should be a priority moving forward. This is how the $200 million is being spent. Recommendation by the subcommittee on economic development, housing, and homelessness solutions to that bigger community bond task force. $70 million, which I think is going to be most, this and the homeownership category will be a lot of what we talk about today. Building new units, $70 million that would be used as gap financing, and a small set aside for the international district of $20 million, as well as homeownership down here for $80 million, would be used for a lot of infrastructure and pre-development costs that builders like James Armstrong rely upon to make their development affordable, and then another $50 million for affordable housing preservation. So making sure that we're also making our existing housing stock gets renovated. A lot of our older multifamily, smaller complexes are coming up on their expiration and could use some money to renovate them and make them a more pleasant and viable living situation for their residents. And then $10 million for homeownership. So think of our single family home repair programs. That is where seniors might benefit, people with fixed incomes, or areas that are facing large pressure economically, gentrification or displacement. Those targeted rehab programs, that money could tap into. So that's a little bit of a precursor to the discussion today that we wanted to make sure you all had. And if you have any questions, again, please use our chat function and we'll get to those at the end of the discussion. Regarding homelessness, we believe that homelessness is a housing issue. There's a direct correlation between cities with high housing costs and higher rates of homelessness. There's been large studies done on this, most recently in California, the largest of its kind, looking at homelessness rates since the 1990s. And a lot of people, surprisingly, are Californians, or you might think that people move to California for those benefits, but they're finding that over the majority of those residents who are experiencing homelessness are from those counties that they live in. So it's a really important topic. And there's also a $35 million request by the Office of Homeless Solutions in that subcommittee I mentioned earlier, the Community Bond Task Force, to invest in permanent supportive housing. And we believe that is a recommendation of the Dallas Housing Coalition. It's a direct result of how we construct and operate our cities when people are experiencing homelessness, and the solution to homelessness is affordable housing. Our motto is Dallas is big enough for everyone. You'll see some of our light blue shirts on camera today. We also have it on the back side of our shirts, and we encourage you to use that slogan. You can hashtag Dallas Housing Coalition during the discussion today. Make sure that people are, this conversation doesn't just stay in this Zoom room. We will post this recording on our social media pages. So we definitely encourage you to follow us and share our content after the event today. And now I'm going to turn the floor over to Ashley Brundage, Senior VP of Community Impact and Executive Director of Housing Stability at the United Way of Metropolitan Dallas. She has been with United Way since 2007 and helps lead the Dallas Housing Coalition in a various number of capacities: spokesperson, steering committee member, and soon to be board president as we're filing our 501c3. And she's one of our fiercest advocates in the city of Dallas for affordable housing. We're lucky to have her moderate the discussion today. Welcome, Ashley. Thank you for being here, and I'll let you introduce our panel.
Thank you, Brian, and thanks for the good overview of the coalition's work. So I get the honor of introducing and speaking with our panelists today. So first up, I'm going to introduce KaDarius Smith, who is with Hunt Realty. KD completed his undergrad and postgraduate studies at SMU and has been a lifelong Dallas resident. He serves the Hunt Realty team by forecasting the feasibility of future workforce housing investment strategies. Katie's passionate about socially responsible commercial real estate impact investing, which focuses on the longevity and sustainability of growth within the city of Dallas's economic environment. So thanks for joining us today. Next, I'm going to introduce James Armstrong. James is the senior pastor of the Community Fellowship Church in West Dallas and president and CEO of Builders of Hope Community Development Corporation. He's a certified urban economic development. He is certified in urban economic development and has over 10 years in the investment banking industry. He serves on the City of Dallas's Housing Finance Corporation and is fully involved in his community. His core ideology is that community engagement is key to urban development. Thank you for joining us today, James. Finally, please join me in welcoming Kirk Presley, an investments associate with Ojala Partners, a Dallas-based mixed-income housing developer focused on creating new attainable housing through innovative public-private partnerships. Kirk works to build and foster relationships with public partners, government agencies, and housing authorities. Since joining Ojala in 2020, he's facilitated the development of over 2,500 mixed-income and affordable units. He's an active member of the Real Estate Council and board member for the SMU Folsom Institute for Real Estate. So thank you for joining us today, Kirk. I'm really glad to get to spend time with the three of y'all this afternoon over lunch. And I start off with a question for each of you to answer that I think, it's a good way to get us kicked off today. But what do you feel are the biggest obstacles facing developers as it relates to the development of affordable housing? And why will this bond funding help us overcome those challenges? So James, can I get you to start us off?
Sure. First and foremost, thank you to the Dallas Housing Coalition, Brian and Ashley. You all's work is commendable, and we are so delighted to be a partner in advocating for this much needed funding in the city of Dallas. What are the barriers? Do we have enough time? I would approach it from this perspective. Obviously, whenever you have local municipalities involved, you add a level of bureaucracy to your development project that sometimes development projects aren't strong enough to bear, right? And what I mean by that is if you have to wait 3 months for subordinations, or if you have to wait for attorney's office to draft certain documents, it could delay the process. And the reason I mention that is not to come down hard on the city, but it really speaks to the fact of a need for private sector to lead out our affordable housing solutions in our city. I think the bond funding that's hopefully is going to come at $200K commitment. 200 million, sorry, that's a big difference. 200 million commitment. I think the bond funding that could potentially come at the tune of 200 million could offer support and incentivize other private sector investors, the local philanthropic community, to be part of the solution to bringing affordable housing to our city.
Thanks. Kirk, since you're already unmuted, how about you go next?
Sure. Yeah, my answer is one word: money. That is the biggest obstacle to building affordable housing. It kind of starts and ends there. When you're talking about affordable housing, you're talking about building something and then offering it to people below the cost that it costs you to build that thing, right? If we wanted everyone to live in market rate housing, we wouldn't have a problem. But we have half of our city that can't afford market rate housing with what the cost of construction is. So it's only through city, government, federal, local subsidy that you can create something that you're going to sell below cost, right? And so luckily the city has an opportunity with the bond funds to do that funding in a way that leverages lots of private investment when we're talking about building housing. So that's investment from banks in the form of loans, investors in the form of equity or tax credits, or however the building's getting financed. And typically on these projects, the city is only putting in maybe 5 to 10% of the money that's going to go towards building housing. So a little bit of city money activates an enormous pool of public-private partnership money that's out there that wants to build housing. It just cannot do it at an affordable rate.
Right. And Katie.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Kirk and James have said, prior to me speaking. But I believe there are quite a few obstacles when it comes to affordable housing development. But for the sake of everybody's Friday afternoon, I'll just speak on one that's kept me up at night thinking about and figuring out on behalf of my firm. When it comes to mixed income developments, I think these developments are far more difficult to create than 100% affordable housing development. There's quite a bit more complexity when it comes to mixing your market rate, which usually isn't renting at the true market rate because it's pulled down by having, a component of low-income housing tax credits. You have various income makeup in a project, and what that does is poses risk to your market rate units in the eyes of a lender, and that's where it kind of starts off. And I think the bond financing could help kind of not concentrate poverty on 100%, at 60% AMI development in places where people don't necessarily want to live, but that's all they can afford, right? So when you're focused on creating mixed income developments in the urban core and you're mixing these incomes in, yeah, it's something that is rarely done. But this is where, public-private partnerships come into play in order to navigate those complexities of mixing, market rate units on top of various income streams. Because like I said, in aspects of the capital stack up and down, these sources of funds also see this as a risk, not just to the development itself, but to the returns that they'll get at the end of the project. So yes, that's why I think the bond financing comes into place.
Thank you. Okay, Kirk, coming back to you. 70 million of the 200 million that the Dallas Housing Coalition is advocating for has been recommended by the Community Bond Task Force Subcommittee on Economic Development, Housing, and Homelessness to be used to create new mixed income communities. Mechanically, how do you see these dollars being used to partner with developers like Ojala and leverage other tools the city already has in place?
Yes, thank you for the question, Ashley. So I would start, and I think the theme of my answer here is flexibility. So when you allocate $70 million towards creating new rental communities, you're creating a source of locally controlled dollars, and that's very unique in the housing funding world. So almost all the subsidies for housing is administered at a federal and sometimes a state level. And so that comes with federal red tape, federal caps on the annual volume that you can use, federal rule books that sometimes determine, I know in Dallas, we have the famous disparate impact case where the LIHTC program and some actions at City Hall, but really the way the LIHTC program itself was written encouraged all the low-income housing tax credit developments in Dallas to be put in Southern Dallas. And so you had a 20 or 30-year period where nothing was built north of I-30 in the way of low-income housing. And so when you have locally administered dollars, you can administer them in accordance with local preferences. So, right, if we want to have a brand new high-rise in Oak Lawn that has 100% affordable, we can do that if we want to, right? Or if we want to encourage a market rate developer to look at a neighborhood that maybe they wouldn't have looked at in Southern Dallas or near Fair Park or Oak Cliff or somewhere that, a market rate developer sitting in Uptown is not going to previously have thought about going to. And so you really, what you can do is you can use our local talent and local private capital that's going to attract people that are used to building market rate housing. You can convince that person to maybe build 10 or 20% affordable in their development that by giving them some money up front in the bond dollars. And on the other side, you can convince people that we're going to build a 100% affordable development that maybe because the federal funding is running out or the federal funding is too competitive that year or whatever, they're not going to have enough money. And so you're going to lose an entire project that was going to be 100% affordable that maybe just needed $2 or $3 million to get them over the edge to where that project was feasible. You're targeting both groups of people, right? So you're going to have more mixed income housing created, and you're going to have projects that otherwise would have died and never seen the light of day that can move forward on the LIHTC side. So I think that's, mechanically speaking, there's a huge amount of flexibility with bond dollars that it makes it a very unique opportunity to create new mixed income housing.
We hear pretty regularly about concern around the difficulty that the city might have deploying these types of dollars, but the way that you're describing it sounds like it could be a lot easier to use these funds versus the HUD funding that they normally work with, right?
Absolutely. And I would point to the city of Austin and the city of San Antonio, who had smaller but similar bond programs in their most recent elections. I believe San Antonio had $30 million allocated for new rental housing, new mixed income rental. And I believe it was all awarded in 9 months.
Wow.
So this money is going to go fast.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of projects, like I said, both from a market rate side all the way to the 100% affordable side, where partnering with the city will make a lot of sense for developers.
Do you have some examples of partnerships or collaborations that have been instrumental in Ojala's success in doing this type of work?
Yes. So I would say on the partnership side, partnering with cities definitely is one. Cities, but also housing authorities and other sort of political governmental entities. One structure that Ojala has partnered with cities on across North Texas has been both the HFC and the PFC structures, which are two different subsidiaries that cities can form to co-own housing in public-private partnerships. Both of those styles of development are getting harder to do because everything's more expensive today. Construction's more expensive, interest on a loan is more expensive. And so that just makes dollars like the bond dollars more important today when the city has tools in the toolbox to partner with developers like the HFC and the PFC. But an HFC and a PFC alone today might not get a deal done. And so that just makes sources of funding even more important. I would also say community collaboration. One thing, no one said the Z word yet, zoning, but the community is incredibly important because, if you wanted to say what's the number 2 obstacle to housing after money, it's zoning, especially in Dallas, where almost all of our land is zoned for single family exclusively. And so one partnership that's been successful for us, and we've really enjoyed getting to know more community members all across the city, not just in the neighborhoods we're building housing in, has been the YIMBY coalitions that, including More Neighbors Dallas, who I'm sure someone from More Neighbors is on this call. Shout out to you guys. But it's not enough to, if you guys are familiar with the acronym NIMBY, which stands for Not in My Backyard, YIMBY is Yes in My Backyard. And it challenges people to not just be anti-NIMBY, but to actually be YIMBY, to show up at the community meeting and say, I do want this here, instead of just, oh, I'm not going to go to that meeting because I'm indifferent to this development coming. And so I would encourage everyone on this, if you care enough about housing to be on this call, definitely join your YIMBY groups, go to your community meetings, speak up in the positive for housing, because there's always going to be people that are going to show up and be negative. So we need people in the room that are going to come and speak positively.
Right. James, coming over to you. $80 million of the $200 million that we are proposing is slated for home ownership development, namely investments in infrastructure and pre-development costs. What makes Builders of Hope unique in its approach to affordable housing, and how would you use these funds to advance homeownership in Dallas?
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. I want to also kind of start by saying this. It's important that when funds are dispersed, that we have policy to assure that those dollars are reaching deep affordability, right? And when I say deep affordability, specifically on the rental side, we want to be assured that it goes, below 60%, which I think the CPOW report has shown that there's a great need for that. So in the case of the homeownership dollars, we know that there is a great need for infrastructure in the southern sector. If you haven't read Barbara Minsker's infrastructure report from SMU, it highlights 60 neighborhoods that are considered infrastructure deserts. We know that this is the case because of, policies of the past, Texas being one of the first cities in Texas. Dallas being one of the first cities in Texas to really bring about explicit housing segregation back in 1916. So we know that while we're meeting the demand for incoming residents, we also have to keep in mind that there is a demand to build out not just multifamily, but also single family affordable housing that acts as sort of an economic restorative justice for communities who have been excluded from home ownership. And so infrastructure is number one. We also know that for developers of color, that pre-development expenses is usually the largest hurdle to getting into development. So we at BOH, when you talk about pre-development, just this week we had groundwater issues that didn't show up on the geotechs. We have encroachment issues. It's so many things that really act as hurdles to getting development done, specifically single family development. And so I would say a large amount of those dollars should be allocated towards just building out the infrastructure so that developers who have been committed to developing in communities that other developers shy away from don't have as many hurdles, or the hurdles aren't as high to getting deals done. And so I would say infrastructure, pre-development fund are the two biggest things that are needed from that housing fund. What our model is, and I've kind of alluded to it before, is that before, I would say 2018, the community development world was highly dependent on the city, to the point to where when the city programs closed down because of HUD reasons, that many of CDC's couldn't survive. They literally could not produce any more housing. In fact, we are in a situation now where we're accepting home dollars, which are the more restrictive funds to get with the city of Dallas. And because there has not been a single family developer using home funds since 2019, there are all sorts of issues with that. So that's why we're so grateful for bond dollars, because in comparison, bond dollars are usually able to get out the door a lot faster than the typical home investment dollars that is used to subsidize construction costs. But our model has been, up until this point, is using those home dollars again to buy down construction costs, and so that buyers so we can reach the affordability for 60 to 80% of households. And so being able to use bond dollars instead of those home dollars means that we're able to decrease the pre-development time of these projects. We're able to get more homes out and on the ground sooner. And then they're not as restrictive. We have some flexibility to put, very unique and creative affordability liens on the property, as opposed to the home dollar restrictions. And so that's kind of how I see developers like BOH using the bond dollars.
Great. When groups like yours and other developers come into a community to put, new development on the ground, whether it's single family homes or multifamily, the issue of gentrification comes up and people worry about displacement, which is a very smart thing to worry about, right? We don't want the community that has lived in an area for many decades and generations to be displaced from that community while we're trying to help build up the economy over there, right? What is Builders of Hope doing to help prevent that type of displacement in Dallas?
Absolutely. So we know that Dallas has a history of disruptive development. It's really been a cycle where we've had communities that were disinvested. And when private developers saw that community was a place of opportunity for new development, we have disruptive development. So we have disinvestment that leads to disruptive development that leads to displacement. That has been the cycle in Dallas. And we can look at communities like State and Thomas, Little Mexico, Elm Thicket, Hamilton Park. And so what we're trying to do is literally break that cycle by producing a toolkit that other cities in Texas have already have done. Kirk mentioned Austin and San Antonio. These are cities that don't have the booming economy that we have, but they've already preemptively passed anti-displacement policies so that when policies are passed through housing department or through the city, that they have an anti-displacement lens. So we're excited. Stephanie Champion, who's leading out this effort, was on the line. I don't see her anymore, but we're excited to produce this toolkit for the city of Dallas in partnership with the city. And what we hope is that, number one, this toolkit will create lasting policy changes. It will have an interactive map that shows neighborhood vulnerability. It would also recommend policies and also looking at 5 different neighborhoods in Dallas. And I'll tell you what those neighborhoods are: South Dallas, West Dallas, Bachman Lake, Vickery Meadow, and Bachman Lake and Cedar Crest. So those are 5 neighborhoods that are each going through different phases of displacement. And what I want to make known is that anti-displacement is not anti-development. And that's something that we have to know. And so anti-displacement is saying we don't want disruptive development. We want neighborhoods to lead out this effort and voicing what their priorities are and what they want their neighborhood to look like. And so what we hope is that developers will use this toolkit, that when they're going into neighborhoods, it's not about just getting in front of neighbors and getting the support you need and having more yeses than nos at the zoning case. It's about how do we bring the neighborhood to the table before development comes so that we have more equitable development. And I want to thank the TREC, the Real Estate Council, Felicia's on the call, for really leading out this movement of equitable development, community-driven equitable development over 3 or 4 years ago. And so that's really what we need. And really that is the solution to bring equity to the Dallas development process.
Great. All right, Katie, we're coming over to you. The final $50 million that's being recommended for use is to preserve affordable housing, whether that's existing multifamily or doing repairs on single family housing. Whether this is something that Hunt Realty is interested in or not, how are you seeing for-profit developers adapt their business strategy to combat the history of what a free market has consequently done to housing affordability?
Right. This is a great question, Ashley. I appreciate this one. Like you said, while I'm confident my team is in the business of acquisitions and preservation of affordable housing, I think there is something to take notice of globally in the private real estate market. You start to see funds pop up periodically that are revolved around affordable housing preservation. And the motives for such, come from two places. One being the risk profile. Someone wants to, diversify their portfolio similar to how they would do in the public markets. Well, affordable housing preservation happens to be a amazing way to do so because you have low vacancy, you have tenants that stay in place for very long times, and you usually go in with a below market rate leverage or below market rate interest rates and things of that nature, right? So that's the one side of it. The second side of it is you're doing a social good, which a lot of private equity real estate firms have in their mission statements now that they are, ESG cognizant and they want to do social good with their dollars, right? So I think that's something that, I don't know how it's been in the past with private equity real estate firms and how that end up turning out in the long run because it's a it's a slippery slope because someone could purchase them and allow for the affordability components to die off and displace, hundreds of residents at a time. But I think the eyes are on private real estate markets now to where if that's done, then that organization would take a big hit from a public perception, and cities would take note. And I think that's more of a risky business for anybody to do. So I genuinely believe that private markets are cognizant of what we need to do in preserving affordable housing. Like I said, we don't necessarily partake in this, but we understand the value that investors may see in focusing on this risk profile and diversifying their portfolio of multifamily assets with affordable housing components involved in them. So,
Yeah. And preserving that naturally occurring affordable housing is one of
yes.
the easiest ways for us to keep affordable housing around. What opportunities do you see that exist for for-profit developers to partner with local nonprofit and community developers?
Right. One thing that I think, anybody in the affordable housing, either development or preservation standpoint would have to dedicate in their time, along with financing and doing everything on the capital side, dealing with investor relations and things of that nature. I think one place in this space that's unique is you have to be involved with the community that you're in, right? If not, your deal could crumble. The financing doesn't make sense anymore. It doesn't matter because, you know, as Kirk mentioned earlier, the NIMBYism could be a big deal, right? I think this is where a nonprofit who is focused on mission, focused on numbers, focused on the greater good of the community, help to steer the eyes of the public perception from big bad developer, big bad investor to, hey, this is a social good. If they make money by doing a social good, everybody wins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody can win, and that's the perception that I think needs to be fought in this space because it's such a sensitive topic for a lot of people to dive into. But I believe that nonprofits do a great job of being mission driven to the point where they could bridge the gap and kind of ease the tensions of some NIMBYism communities, where a developer who has to worry about the financing has to worry about the deal dying, and all he or she is so focused on the deal holding together that sometimes the most important aspect of it could be left on the back burner. And this is where I see, a nonprofit organization being able to step in and lead the charge.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you to all three of you for the conversation on the panel today. We want to leave some time for those folks that joined our audience to ask some questions. So Brian, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Awesome. Yeah, we've got 3 questions so far. One that was posed in the chat to everyone can see, and I got a couple of direct questions as well. So we're doing great on time. We definitely, if you would like to ask another question, please feel free to drop it in the chat. First question for the panel, in terms of land banking and readaptive mechanisms to address affordable housing, how can those work together? And interactions with the land bank and using that to address affordable housing?
So we utilize the land bank. I would say a good 60% of our lot inventory comes from land bank. And one of the challenges that we're facing is the ability to provide density on these projects, on these particular lots. Because the land bank is typically state statute, there are a lot of restrictions, not only to income, but to how you can use it. And so there definitely needs to be a reform to the land bank policy at the state level, to allow for density, to allow for ADUs, to allow accessory dwelling units, and other, creative models that we're seeing across the country, because I believe that density is really the way to go to bring about affordability. And I think the land bank program could lead the way in that. Let me also say, just in regards to the land bank idea in general, local municipalities outside of the city of Dallas have to buy into this idea. We had a situation in West Dallas where DISD owned the last piece of acreage in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood called, man, the name is escaping me, but the neighborhood, private developers coming in, buying lots, overpriced or above market housing being put in the neighborhood, literally causing displacement, immediate displacement to residents. So instead of land being sold to private developers, I think this is where other municipalities like our school district and other quasi-governmental agencies could be smarter around how we give out these lots and how we sell them to the private sector, and specifically in neighborhoods that are feeling the pressure of private development. Another situation, we were just watching the council one day, and there were 11 lots in West Dallas being sold through private real estate for $80K each. I picked up the phone and called David, which is, unfortunately we don't have that access anymore, but picked up the phone, called David. Immediately those lots were transferred to housing for affordable housing. So it can be done. We just have to have the will to do it.
Awesome. Thank you, James. Certainly agree that flexibility makes a difference, and if the program's too restrictive, then the program should be adjusted to make it more beneficial for developers like yourself. Next question. For our folks, this kind of goes back to one of the questions we asked earlier about the mechanisms of getting these dollars out the door. Dallas has had home repair programs in the past. We've had economic development funds in the past. They kind of get stuck somewhere along the way where it doesn't get out the door as fast as it should, and it might even discourage organizations from participating in those programs again. Do y'all have any recommendations on the best mechanism? Not just, once we get the money allotted, how do we get it spent within 5 years so we can, prove our success and measure our impact? Thoughts there?
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, I think it starts with competitive public bidding, right? Like, establish a framework that says, like, okay, if you're going to apply for this money, the funds have to go towards affordability that must be at least, X level, say 60 AMI. And then other than that, leave it pretty open, right? Like, don't be overly prescriptive or restrictive in what kind of projects will be able to compete for the funds, and then open it up to competition, let developers apply, and then, award it competitively through RFPs. I think the best way to make sure the money gets spent is to not be overly restrictive on exactly what the project needs to look like, and then let people compete and let the best projects win it. Otherwise, saying, all right, of the $70 million, 20 million of it has to go to someone that wants to build on this specific site. And it's like, well, that site might not be ready to support a 300 unit apartment complex today. I mean, like, so I really think it starts with flexibility and competitiveness.
So we've been part of the process a couple of times now for funding, and I would agree with Kirk. Flexibility is key. One of the biggest changes that David made was, instead of it being this competitive, submit your proposals on this date, this time, now it's an open process so that applications can be submitted tomorrow, the next day. It's literally an open window, and that's key. And so we have to make sure that the next housing director or the interim housing director keeps that the way it is, right? Developers need flexibility on when to submit proposals. Now, the mechanics of when projects are approved, a couple of things that we need to do. Number one, EcoDev currently has what you call administrative action, where they can literally internally decide on a proposal and get it out the door without council approval. Now, I know this is a heavy lift, and we have a council that shies away from this, but there needs to be a set level of administrative action for the housing department, where housing can get money out the door without going through the hoopla of committee, of council, and then city attorney, and all of that process. The next thing is, we need a dedicated city attorney to the housing department. We literally need a city attorney that sits in the housing department, that processes the housing deals, because right now we're working on a multifamily deal. It literally took 9 months to get agreements. 9 months. Now, we're a nonprofit, so we can go out and raise money, but tell me what private developer would wait 9 months for an agreement for development, right? So we know that's unrealistic. So these are the hurdles, right? And we have to be diligent, and I hope that the Housing Coalition is diligent and is a watchdog about how these funds are distributed, because we can celebrate the win of getting the 200 million, but then if the money sits there, and I will tell you, I'm in a situation now where, because the money sat so long, we're now in a race on the time clock. We have to get certain money out by the end of the year, almost $2 million, but simply because it's set there, and because of city processes. So once we celebrate the win of the 200 mil, we then need to advocate for streamlined city processes to make sure that it gets out the door. And I think that will increase developers' interest in being involved in Dallas. Not only that, but also the permitting process. There needs to be expedited permitting so that the developments that have city funding attached are expedited at a quicker rate than normal projects.
Awesome. Great discussion, and glad we're recording this, and so we can look back on it and guide ourselves as a coalition moving forward. Thanks, Kirk and James. Next question, couple more. On the mixed income front, trying to achieve more mixed income communities, it's fairly common, or you can see a mixed income community in one building, but you might not see a mixed income neighborhood with all different types of housing products. So do you all know of any examples where we have a success story in Dallas, where we have a stable mix of incomes throughout? So it's not just we're tearing down naturally affordable product and building much more expensive homes, but we're still trying to keep some of that stability. And if there isn't a success story, is mixed income only viable when you go vertical with rental multifamily product?
I'll maybe come back to a specific example, but I think this brings up a really good point about mixed income, which I don't think gets talked about enough, which is mixed income as a displacement tool, or part of the displacement prevention toolbox, which is, if you go drive down Singleton right now in West Dallas or North Oak Cliff, go look at how many I mean, it's boom, 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 boom. There's literally like 5 brand new apartment complexes in a row that are all being built, and each one of those probably has 300 units. Now, I don't think those didn't come from tearing down any single family housing. They came from tearing down like industrial warehouses. But if you can imagine development that was turning previously single family houses into a huge multifamily complex, making 20% of the units in that new apartment complex when you do build it is ensuring, if that was a lower income neighborhood before, that there is a room in that neighborhood still for lower income people. And so, I think when people talk about, going back to James's point about density when it relates to displacement, mixed income is, to me, a key part of that conversation that I don't think people talk about enough. In Dallas specifically, I would say like a neighborhood that has a huge variety of density that's kind of most obvious to me is like the Oaklawn, everything sort of from Oaklawn up to Turtle Creek, where you have 2plexes and 4plexes and 8plexes, and some of them are condos, some of them are rentals, but you also have 30-story towers. And I would point to, a neighborhood group in that area, the Oaklawn Commission, which is basically like a whole nother layer of zoning. And if you're a developer in that area, you're very familiar with the Oaklawn Commission. If you want to go take something down to the Horseshoe at City Hall, you basically have to get it cleared by them first. And that's a community focused group that says, we want this, we don't want this, we want affordability, we want lower density, we don't want just high priced rentals. And so, that's I think a great example of, a community coming together and saying, this is what we want. And if you're going to build this here, it's going to look like this. And we don't want to just destroy the fabric of our neighborhood overnight. I would point to Oaklawn as a place where mixed income without government subsidy can occur.
Yeah. So another thing that I hope that the funding will allow and will incentivize other nonprofit groups who aren't development focused to get involved and get development, right? A good example of this is the Resource Center. They recently have a project. I know Felicia was involved in that project, but it seems that nonprofits like the Resource Center, when they bring these multifamily developments to the market, that it is a mix. I mean, when I say a mix, it's a good mix of 80, 60, 50% AMI, and that's really what we need. I would hope that the bond financing would allow developers to mimic the LIHTC mixes that we see in LIHTC. I am a big fan of PFC, but one of my problems with PFC is that their affordability is 80%. And if you look at those numbers, it's literally what the market, oftentimes slightly below what the market is bearing. And so I think if we could utilize bond funding to mimic LIHTC deals, to allow for developers, and nothing against developers who are doing that. I appreciate Kirk and his team. I mean, they've done a great job of community engagement. Has really set an example of what you do when you come into a neighborhood, and how to make changes, not because you have to, but because the neighborhood has requested it. So, but if we could find a way to utilize bond funding to mimic the LIHTC mix, I think that would be a success.
This last question real quick, maybe KD, if you have a thought on this. Any, different housing types, condos, townhomes, duplexes, are y'all trying to build some of those? And what is needed to spur that type of development? And then we'll wrap up the panel.
Yeah, without getting into the details of things that haven't been put forward yet, I think what we are looking forward to is tackling some of the headache, or seeing if the headache is truly worth it, and how long it takes to relieve ourselves of it. But we are currently looking at the strategies of how to deliver this mixed income and mixed income communities that are sustainable, but at the same time desirable for all, right? And I think one of the the first things, like, I don't know where to begin, right? I think it's like any other feasibility study that someone would do if they were taking on a project. You don't know where to begin. You start off by looking at financing, this and that, but like Kirk mentioned earlier on the call, you know you're going to build it, and if you want to build it well, that it's going to be expensive, and that if you want to have a mix of incomes, those incomes aren't usually going to support highly inflated construction costs. So the basics are the basics, and we're going to build it for a lot. The rents are not going to be enough. We need a chunk of capital, and we need partnership with the city, right? Bottom line, we need partnership with various, the capital stack in a lot of these deals, which people don't really understand is, I've heard people refer to it as a lasagna, right? A mix of capital sources, just all over the place that affect each other in various ways. Well, I think the first step is just getting in front of the important individuals at City Hall, right? And seeing what's possible, talking about it, right? And if the projects you're working on are as impactful as you believe they are, then you should have no problem getting the right people on your side, right? But sometimes that takes a lot of communication, over communication, transparency, which a lot of people don't really focus on, is transparency, because the same way I'm speaking about these things out loud now, a lot of developers may expect for these people that work on behalf of the city to understand this naturally. There's a bridge, there's a gap that needs to be bridged in terms of educating one another, right? We can go back and forth of just educating one another and seeing, how it can work out for both of us in the greater good of the city of Dallas. So I think that's the first step, right? That we're going to take on is getting in front of important individuals that have a say so in our projects, and get them on our side and let them know that, hey, we're engaging with you at the forefront of it, right? And we want you to be a part of it throughout the cycle of the project, and be able to walk away saying that you were a part of it, right? We want to do this together and not include you when we need you, right?
Mm-hmm. I've said it better myself, Kitty. So
yeah.
Thank you, and I think it's a great note to end on. I really appreciate. Give everybody, if you're in the chat, virtual kudos to our panels and applause. Great job, Kirk, James, Katie, Ashley. Thank you all so much, and everybody for tuning in today. If you haven't had a chance to join us yet, or go visit our website, DallasHousingCoalition.com, we'd love for you to take a look at all 170 plus members that we currently have. And if your organization is interested in joining, there's an easy form to do that on our website. And please feel free to reach out to myself or Henry. We'll send this recording out in the slides to everybody who registered, so y'all can get back in touch with us and ask any follow-up questions. We'll make our panelists available. Ways you continue to support us, please continue to monitor the city council calendar. Those meetings are ongoing, and we need people to show up and speak in favor of affordable housing. We do have a script on our website. If you'd like to contact your city council member or any of the community bond task force members, you can go to that bit.ly/DHC contact and email the community bond task force at cbtf2024@dallas.gov. And hopefully this is not your last event with us. We'll be announcing more events and rallies at City Hall shortly. So thank you again for spending your lunch hour with us. It is 1:03, and we'd love to wish you all a great rest of your day and weekend. Stay safe and follow us on social media. Hope to hear from you soon. And thank you again. Okay, well,
Everybody.